On January 11, 2013, the halls of Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia, were filled with the usual buzz of students moving between classes. But inside the old gymnasium, hidden in plain sight, a gruesome discovery was about to be made that would haunt the community for decades. Two students noticed a pair of socks sticking out from a rolled-up wrestling mat standing in the corner. When they leaned over to look inside, they didn't find discarded gym gear. They found the lifeless body of 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson. He was upside down, his face bloated with blood, and his body wedged so tightly into the center of the mat that it seemed physically impossible for him to have gotten there on his own. Within 24 hours, investigators called it a freak accident. They said he was simply reaching for a shoe. But as the plastic wrap came off the case, a different story began to emerge, one involving missing organs, blood-stained walls, and a family's desperate search for the truth. You are watching Shadow Files, and today, we dive into the dark, suffocating mystery of Kendrick Johnson. Kendrick was a multi-sport athlete, a brother, and a son who had his entire life ahead of him. To those who knew him, the idea that he would die in such a bizarre, undignified way was unthinkable. When the news broke, the initial shock quickly turned into suspicion. The scene inside the gym was chaotic. The wrestling mats were stacked vertically, standing about 6 feet tall. Kendrick's body was found in the center of one of these rolled-up mats. The official narrative was that Kendrick had dropped one of his sneakers into the mat, leaned over to retrieve it, fell in, and became stuck. Because he was upside down, the blood rushed to his head, and he eventually succumbed to positional asphyxia. It sounds like a tragic, one-in-a-million accident. But when the Johnson family saw the state of their son's body, they knew something was terribly wrong. The physical evidence at the scene didn't seem to match the theory of a clumsy teenager. First, there was the blood. There were drops of blood on the floor near the mats and even on the wall, yet investigators claimed this blood didn't belong to Kendrick or was too old to be relevant. Then there was the issue of the shoes. Kendrick's own shoes were found in two different places, one was underneath him, and the other was neatly placed behind his legs, almost as if someone had tucked it there after he was already inside. If he was reaching for a shoe, why was one already at the bottom? And how did a boy with broad shoulders slide into a hole only a few inches wide without struggling enough to knock the mat over? These questions started a fire in Valdosta that hasn't stopped burning. The deeper the family dug, the more disturbing the details became. After the initial autopsy by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation ruled the death an accident, the family fought for a second, independent autopsy. What they found was the stuff of nightmares. When the private pathologist opened Kendrick's body, he found that all of his internal organs were missing. In their place, Kendrick's body had been stuffed with old newspapers. This wasn't just a procedural error, it was a violation of the highest order. Furthermore, the second autopsy revealed something the first one missed, a blow to the right side of Kendrick's neck that appeared to be caused by blunt force trauma. This suggested that Kendrick hadn't just fallen into a mat, he had been struck before he ever ended up inside it. If you are finding this deep dive into the Kendrick Johnson case gripping, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at Shadow Files, we don't just look at the surface, we look for the truth hidden in the dark. Your support helps us keep these stories alive for the families seeking justice. Now, let's get back to the evidence that the authorities tried to ignore. One of the most controversial aspects of this case involves the school's surveillance footage. Lowndes High School was equipped with dozens of cameras, but when the footage from that day was finally released, it was a mess. There were significant gaps in the recordings. In the minutes leading up to Kendrick's disappearance, the cameras covering the gym area seemed to skip or go dark. When the footage did show Kendrick, it was grainy and out of focus. The family's legal team argued that the footage had been tampered with to protect someone. But who? This leads us into the darkest corners of the Valdosta community. Rumors began to swirl around two brothers, the sons of an FBI agent, who attended the same school. Some claimed there was a long-standing rivalry or a fight that had occurred previously. Despite these boys having what appeared to be solid alibis, one was on a bus to a wrestling meet and the other was in a different part of the school, the suspicion lingered. The local authorities were accused of a massive cover-up, fueled by the status of the boy's father. While no charges were ever brought against them, and multiple federal investigations found no evidence of their involvement, the public perception remains divided. Was this a case of a small-town power structure protecting its own, or was it a tragic accident turned into a conspiracy theory by a grieving family? There are three main theories that dominate the conversation around Kendrick Johnson. The first is the official one. the accident theory. Proponents of this view say that teenagers do impulsive, often dangerous things. They argue that Kendrick frequently stored his shoes in the mats to avoid paying for a locker and that on this day, he simply slipped too far. They point to the lack of defensive wounds on his hands or DNA from a struggle as proof that he was alone. But this theory fails to explain the blunt force trauma found in the second autopsy or why the mats remained standing if a 160-pound boy was thrashing inside them. The second theory is the cover-up theory. This suggests Kendrick was murdered, perhaps in a fight that went too far, and his body was placed in the mat to make it look like an accident. The missing organs and the newspaper stuffing are seen as a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence. In this scenario, the school, the local police, and even federal agents worked in tandem to erase the trail. The sheer scale of such a conspiracy would be massive, involving dozens of people keeping a secret for over a decade. Yet, for the Johnson family, it is the only thing that explains the inconsistencies in the medical reports and the missing video footage. The third theory is more nuanced, suggesting that while it may not have been a pre-planned murder, the investigation was handled with such gross negligence that it became a de facto cover-up. Perhaps the scene was contaminated, the evidence was lost through incompetence, and the missing organs were the result of a funeral home's poor practices rather than a sinister plot. In this view, Kendrick's death was a tragedy compounded by a broken justice system that failed to give a black family the thorough investigation they deserved. In 2021, the case was briefly reopened by the Lowndes County Sheriff, who promised a fresh look at the evidence. But by 2022, the case was closed once again, with the sheriff stating there was no evidence of foul play. To this day, the Johnson family stands on the sidewalk outside the courthouse, holding signs with their son's face, refusing to let the world forget his name. They believe the truth is still out there, locked away in a file or hidden in the silence of someone who was in that gym on January 10, 2013. The death of Kendrick Johnson remains one of the most polarizing cases in American history. It is a story of a life cut short and a family that refuses to be silenced. Whether it was a freak accident or a cold-blooded crime, the image of those feet sticking out of a wrestling mat serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes, the truth is buried deeper than we are willing to dig. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Shadow Files. What do you believe happened in that gymnasium? Was it a tragic accident, or is there a killer still walking the streets of Valdosta? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you want to see more true crime deep dives, and share it to help spread awareness for Kendrick's story. We'll see you in the next file.